Emily Carson and Layla Brooks were just two teenage best friends on a quiet spring hike through the Colorado wilderness. They laughed, they took photos, and they never came back. What was supposed to be a peaceful walk turned into one of the most disturbing double murders the state had ever seen. The killer, gone. Vanished into the woods without a trace. For 5 years, the case sat frozen. No suspects. No answers. Until now. Because what someone buried deep beneath the soil, a single object, just blew the case wide open. And what it leads to will leave you speechless. This isn't just a murder mystery. This is a story of obsession, betrayal, and a chilling truth that someone very close had something to hide all along. Stay with me. You're not going to believe how this ends. Before we begin this investigation, let us know where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more real-life mysteries like this one. White Pines, Colorado, was the kind of small town where front doors were left unlocked and neighbors brought each other cookies in the winter. Situated at the edge of the Rocky Mountains, it was a place people came to escape the noise of city life. Tourists drove in during ski season, but most of the year it remained quiet and uneventful. Everyone knew each other's names. Families stayed for generations. It was peaceful, safe, until the spring of 2020, when everything changed. That's when 16-year-old Emily Carson and her best friend, Layla Brooks, vanished without a trace during a casual Saturday hike. Their disappearance turned the sleepy mountain town into the center of a horror story, one that would stain the soil of White Pines for years. At the time, no one knew what really happened. But the scars it left behind would run deeper than anyone imagined. Emily Carson and Layla Brooks had been inseparable since the 3rd grade. They shared lockers, secrets, and a love for nature. Emily was the quiet, artistic one, always drawing in the margins of her notebooks, dreaming of becoming an illustrator. Layla, more outgoing, had a contagious laugh and big dreams of becoming a wildlife photographer. They were honor students at White Pines High School, well-liked, never the type to sneak off or get into trouble. On April 18, 2020, they packed a day bag with trail mix, water bottles, and Layla's mom's old film camera. They told their parents they were headed to Ridgeview Canyon Trail, a route they had walked a dozen times before. Emily sent her mom a picture of them smiling at the trailhead around 11:30 a.m. Layla texted her brother at 12:15 p.m., saying, "Just past the overlook. It's beautiful today." That would be the last time anyone heard from either of them. By 5 p.m. that day, both families began to worry. The girls were usually back home by mid-afternoon. When their phones went to voicemail and messages stopped getting delivered, panic set in quickly. Kathy Carson, Emily's mother, called Layla's mom, then the police. "They're just hiking," officers initially said, trying to calm nerves. "Let's give it a little time." But Kathy's voice trembled when she replied, "This isn't like her. Something's wrong." Within 2 hours, a search and rescue team was dispatched. Volunteers from across town grabbed flashlights, boots, and jackets and began combing the wooded trails. The sun dipped behind the mountains, and the temperature fell. Ridgeview Canyon turned from scenic to sinister. It was a tangled maze of trees, rocks, and narrow paths that twisted into dead ends and drop-offs. That night, the forest swallowed the searchers in silence. By sunrise the next morning, the search effort had grown. Dozens of volunteers showed up with dogs, ATVs, and drones. The White Pines Fire Department joined in, setting up a command post at the trailhead. The story spread quickly on social media. Hashtags like #FindEmilyandLayla and #WhitePinesGirls started trending locally. Search dogs picked up a scent on the western slope of the canyon, near a narrow ledge that descended into a creek. There, searchers found Layla's red flannel shirt snagged on a branch and a broken phone screen nearby. Police marked the area but couldn't locate the girls. Some believed they may have slipped and fallen, possibly injured and unable to return. But others began to worry about something darker. There were rumors, whispers that the canyon had always held secrets. Stories of a strange man seen camping nearby a few weeks earlier started to surface, though no one had a name or photo. On the third day, a volunteer team stumbled on something horrific. About 2 miles off trail, in a narrow grove of pine trees, they found a disturbed patch of soil and a pair of shoes partially buried in leaves. A few feet away lay Emily's backpack, torn open, contents scattered. Police quickly closed off the area and asked volunteers to stand down. Hours later, law enforcement made a grim announcement. Both girls had been found, dead. The details were not shared publicly at first, but it didn't take long before the truth leaked. The girls had been murdered, gruesomely. It wasn't an accident. Their bodies showed signs of struggle, blunt force trauma, and most chilling of all, deliberate staging. It was a crime that suggested not only violence, but intent. White Pines, a town that had never known such horror, was now facing something far beyond a tragic accident. A killer had walked among them. The immediate aftermath was chaos. News crews descended on the town, turning the local diner into a media hub. The sheriff gave a brief statement confirming the girls' deaths, but refused to answer questions about the condition of their bodies. He only said, "We believe this was not random." That set off a firestorm. Parents pulled their children from school. The Ridgeview Trail was closed indefinitely. Everyone was looking over their shoulder. The girls' families were devastated. Kathy Carson collapsed during the funeral planning and had to be hospitalized for dehydration and stress. Layla's younger brother, Ty, who had just turned 14, stopped speaking for nearly a month. Emily and Layla were buried side by side in the White Pine Cemetery, under identical stones with their school photos etched in marble. The town went quiet after that. Too quiet. People stopped smiling. Doors stayed locked. And the forest no longer felt like a friend. The investigation moved quickly at first. Dozens of people were questioned: trail workers, registered sex offenders in nearby counties, known drifters, even former students expelled from a high school. Police released a composite sketch based on a hiker who reported seeing a strange man near the overlook the same day the girls went missing. He was described as tall, thin, in his 30s or 40s, wearing a green army jacket and carrying a large backpack. But no one recognized him. The trail cameras that lined the upper ridge had malfunctioned days before, and there were no useful surveillance shots. The sheriff's department brought in the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, and for a while it looked like progress might be made. But weeks passed. Leads dried up. The mysterious man in the army jacket was never identified. No fingerprints were found on the girls' bodies. And then, like fog fading from the canyon floor, the case began to go cold. 3 months after the murders, the last official update from the sheriff came during a town hall. "We have exhausted every lead available to us," he said, eyes heavy. "We are not giving up, but we ask for patience." That same week, Detective Mark Ramirez, the lead investigator, quietly requested a leave of absence. He was later seen sitting alone at Ridgeview Trail's blocked-off entrance, staring into the woods. Emily's mother withdrew from her job and rarely left her house. Layla's father took to drinking and moved out of state. Ty Brooks became withdrawn, spending hours researching missing persons cases and sketching the man from the composite sketch over and over again. The town held a candlelight vigil every April 18th, but fewer people came each year. The case that had once gripped the entire state of Colorado now sat in a box in a police evidence room. The killer had disappeared, and taken all the answers with him. In the early days, there were still people who thought it might have been a bear or mountain lion attack. But those who saw the scene knew better. The brutality, the staging, the precise way the bodies had been hidden. This was the work of a human, and not just any human. A predator. Someone who had waited, watched, and planned. Some investigators quietly theorized that the killer had been camping out in Ridgeview for weeks beforehand. Maybe even following the girls long before that day. But without a name, a face, or a trace of DNA, nothing could be proven. People began to move on. Hikers returned, cautiously. The town fixed its broken trail cameras and updated emergency systems. But the wound never really healed. For Emily and Layla's families, every day was a reminder of what had been lost. And somewhere, out there in the vast Colorado wilderness, a killer was still free. The funerals for Emily Carson and Layla Brooks were held just 1 week apart. Their families had originally planned to hold a joint service, but grief had fractured even that. Kathy Carson could barely get out of bed the morning of the burial. Layla's father had already left town. What remained were 2 quiet ceremonies with closed caskets, piles of flowers, and dozens of teenagers crying into their sleeves. The white steeple of the local chapel had never seen this many mourners. Teachers, classmates, coaches, and even strangers came to pay respects. But beneath the surface, sorrow wasn't the only thing stirring. There was fear. Not the kind that comes and goes, the kind that settles in your bones. People stopped trusting their neighbors. Parents began installing home security cameras. Businesses kept their lights on longer. For a town that had never known real danger, the shock of the murders never truly faded. Detective Mark Ramirez, who had worked homicides in Denver before moving to White Pines, said later in an interview that this case was unlike anything he'd ever seen. The level of violence, the planning, it felt personal. But we couldn't find a link between the girls and anyone dangerous. He reviewed every student in their high school, dug into faculty records, cross-referenced their social media for stalkers or troubling messages. Nothing. The only possible lead, the man in the green army jacket, remained a ghost. No credit card use, no vehicle sightings, no trail of any kind. The longer the investigation dragged on, the more pressure Ramirez faced from the families and the town. He stopped sleeping. He stopped going home. He kept the girls' case files open on his desk even after the task force was pulled back. It was like a wall I couldn't punch through, he told a colleague. Everything pointed nowhere. Kathy Carson, once a bright and cheerful presence at the local community center, now lived like a ghost in her own home. The laughter that once echoed from her kitchen was gone. Emily's room remained untouched, frozen in time. Posters on the walls, notebooks half filled with doodles, a pair of sneakers by the bed, it all became a kind of shrine. Kathy stopped answering phone calls. She quit her job at the library. Her only regular visitor was Ty Brooks, Layla's younger brother. He came by once a week to sit in silence on her porch, sometimes dropping off drawings or folded letters he wrote to his sister. He was only 14, but grief aged him quickly. He stopped smiling, started wearing his sister's old hoodie, and began filling notebooks with observations and memories of that day. "Maybe I'll find something the cops missed," he once said. No one laughed. They knew he was serious. Around town, rumors began to grow like weeds. Some said it was a serial killer, someone passing through on the highway, selecting random victims. Others believed it was personal. Maybe a jealous ex. Maybe someone from a nearby hunting group that used Ridgeview for training. Every stranger who came to town was now viewed with suspicion. The local sheriff held a meeting to dispel wild theories, but even he looked shaken. "We don't have reason to believe there's an ongoing threat," he said. But people noticed his hands trembling. Some families moved away. Others refused to let their kids go anywhere alone, even in broad daylight. The high school installed new security cameras. A curfew was passed for minors. Ridgeview Trail remained closed indefinitely, yellow tape fluttering in the wind like warning flags. The forest that had once offered peace now loomed like a monster, full of shadows and unanswered questions. The media attention died down after the 3rd month. Reporters packed up. News trucks drove off. But the damage was permanent. For those who lived in White Pines, every sound in the night now carried weight. Children developed nightmares. Some students transferred to schools out of town. Teachers noticed a spike in anxiety among teens, especially girls. Counselors were overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Detective Ramirez continued working behind the scenes. He visited the trail at night, reviewed old ranger logs, and even contacted FBI profilers. He was convinced the killer had camped out somewhere nearby, watched the girls, learned their patterns. But without physical evidence or witness testimony, the theory remained just that, a theory. Still, Ramirez kept pushing, even when his department told him to move on. Some cases don't want to be solved, one officer told him. Ramirez responded, this one's screaming to be solved. You just have to listen closely. Then, 5 months after the murders, a hunter named Cal Whitley stumbled onto something odd while scouting for elk near a long-abandoned mining shack deep within Ridgeview's off-trail area. He wasn't supposed to be there, the area was closed, but curiosity got the better of him. He noticed a torn piece of fabric snagged on a rusted nail just outside the shack's doorway. It was faded, weathered, but unmistakably similar to the flannel shirt Layla was known to be wearing the day she disappeared. Inside the shack, Whitley found the remains of an old fire pit, a crude sleeping bag, and wrappers from food brands not sold in the area. It looked like someone had stayed there off-grid for a while, possibly during the week of the murders. He took photos and immediately reported it. When authorities arrived, the site had already been partially disturbed by animals and time, but the implications were chilling. Forensic investigators combed the site, but much of the potential evidence had degraded. Still, one item stood out, a weathered matchbox from a gas station 90 miles away, one that had long since gone out of business. The shack had likely been used as a hideout. Whether it was before, during, or after the murders wasn't immediately clear. Detective Ramirez was livid that it had taken so long to find. We should have swept every inch of this canyon, he muttered. He returned to the station and reopened the case file with renewed energy. The existence of that shack changed the timeline. It meant the killer had possibly been hiding in plain sight. Worse, it meant he may have been watching the search parties as they looked for the girls. That level of cruelty, of com-planning, haunted everyone involved. Ramirez began working late again. Kathy Carson, after months of silence, agreed to speak with him. Kathy told Ramirez about something she hadn't shared before. A week before Emily went missing, she noticed a white van parked across from their house early in the morning. It was gone when she looked again. At the time, she thought it was a delivery driver. But now, she wasn't so sure. There was someone watching us, she whispered. Ty Brooks, now more withdrawn than ever, started drawing maps of Ridgeview from memory. He began cataloging every old shelter, lookout point, and side trail the police hadn't searched. Kathy encouraged him. It gave him purpose. Together, they kept the memory of their loved ones alive, not just in grief, but in obsession. Ramirez called them emotional anchors, people too tied to the case to let it die. Sometimes, he said, they're the reason a mystery stays warm in the cold. As the first anniversary of the murders approached, the community held another vigil. Fewer people came this time, but candles still lit the town square. Pictures of Emily and Layla were placed side by side on the memorial wall. A local musician played their favorite song. During the moment of silence, a single car drove slowly past the square, headlights off. No one could say for sure if it was anything sinister, but several attendees noted it. The town was still watching, still waiting, and the killer, if he was still alive, was out there. Somewhere. Maybe even close. Maybe driving through the square just to see the damage he had caused. Time is cruel when justice is denied. In White Pines, Colorado, it moved forward, but not without leaving deep scars behind. The town slowly returned to routine. Coffee brewed at the diner each morning. Students trickled into the high school, and tourists again passed through to take photos of the mountains. But under the surface, nothing was the same. The silence in Ridgeview Canyon wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow, haunted. The trail remained closed, a wooden sign nailed across the entrance with the words, "Trail closed, no entry." For many residents, the sign felt more symbolic than practical. It wasn't just a closure of the trail. It was the closure of innocence. Emily and Layla were gone, and with them, something fundamental about White Pines had been taken. Safety, trust, a sense that the world made sense. And no one had paid for it. Detective Mark Ramirez stayed on the case longer than anyone expected. Even after his department quietly reclassified the investigation as inactive, he refused to give up. He kept copies of the case files in his home, in a locked drawer next to his bed. Sometimes at night, he would wake from dreams about the girls. Not the crime, but their smiling faces on missing posters. "I felt like they were waiting," he would later say in a recorded interview. "Not haunting me, just waiting." But eventually, time caught up with him too. In late 2023, Ramirez retired from the force. He moved into a small home on the edge of town and spent his days gardening, though the papers and photos from the case still sat on his coffee table. He wasn't sure if he kept them for hope or guilt. Either way, he couldn't let them go. Kathy Carson faded from public view entirely. She sold her house and moved into a small rented apartment behind the post office, far from the neighborhood where Emily had grown up. Most of her days were spent in silence. She didn't drive. She didn't visit family. She existed. Her only consistent connection to the world was Ty Brooks, who now stood at the edge of adulthood. He was 19 years old, lanky and serious, his face carved by grief but hardened by resolve. He had never forgotten his sister, never stopped researching. He had notebooks full of timelines, possible suspects, and photos taken from town archives. Layla's hoodie was now faded and worn, but he still wore it on cold days. People who knew Ty said he was polite, quiet, but intense. He had enrolled at a nearby community college to study criminal justice. His goal was clear: find whoever took his sister and Emily. The people of White Pines slowly adjusted to life with a shadow hanging over them. The trail remained closed. The mining shack found during the early months of the investigation had been quietly removed, dismantled and burned down by order of the county. There were no answers in it, only ghosts. A few residents protested, saying it should have been preserved as evidence, but the sheriff's department insisted that everything had been documented. In truth, many wanted it gone for emotional reasons. The presence of that shack was a grim reminder of how close evil had come. It felt like a scar that needed to be covered. But for Kathy, Ty, and Ramirez, removing physical evidence didn't erase the truth. If anything, it buried it deeper. "They think burning it down makes it go away," Kathy said in one of her rare conversations. "But it just makes it harder to find." 3 years passed. Then 4. The case was never officially closed, but fewer people asked about it. New families moved into town, unaware or pretending to be. The girls' names came up only once a year, during the vigils. By the 5th anniversary, even those vigils had grown smaller. On the 5th April since the murders, only 6 people gathered in the town square, candles flickering in the wind. Ty stood among them, taller now, older. He held a framed photo of Layla, smiling at the camera strap around her neck. Kathy stood beside him. Ramirez watched from his truck across the street. None of them said much. They didn't need to. The silence spoke volumes. As the candles burned down, a quiet resignation settled in. Maybe the killer had truly gotten away. Maybe justice wasn't coming. It was a thought they had all considered, but never said aloud. Ty refused to give up. In his dorm room at college, he kept a wall of notes and maps, taped up like a detective's war board. He collected archived newspaper clippings, autopsy summaries, evidence photos, and witness interviews. Every few months, he filed Freedom of Information Act requests for records related to Ridgeview Canyon. He wasn't just chasing answers, he was chasing purpose. The pain of losing Layla had become the engine that powered his life. One professor, noticing Ty's obsession, suggested he write a thesis on unsolved rural homicides. Ty declined. "I'm not ready to write about it," he said. "I'm still in it." His bedroom wall became more than research. It was a monument, a sacred space, a promise that this wasn't over. One way or another, he was going to make someone answer for what had happened 5 years ago. Then came the unexpected call. It was a warm afternoon in early May 2025. Ty had just finished class and was walking home when his phone rang. It was a number from White Pines. The voice on the other end was quiet, older. "Ty, this is Cal Whitley. You probably don't remember me. I'm the hunter who found the shack a few years back." Ty stopped in his tracks. Cal continued, "I think. I found something again. I was digging on my property, planting vegetables. My shovel hit something." Ty's heart raced. "What was it?" he asked. Cal paused. "It was metal, wrapped in tarp. You need to see it." Ty dropped everything and drove straight home. Ramirez met him there. Kathy came too. It was the first time in years all three stood in one place, on a quiet farm outside White Pines, staring at a mound of disturbed soil. None of them spoke as Cal pulled out what he had found. Buried just 2 feet below the surface was a rusted hunting knife, the blade dull and stained. It had been wrapped tightly in an old tarp, bound with twine. Ramirez held it with gloved hands, inspecting the handle. There were initials carved into it, faint but visible. Seedy. Ty's stomach dropped. "Is that blood?" he asked. Ramirez nodded slowly. "We'll need forensics to confirm." But deep down, they all knew. Something about the way the blade looked, aged, forgotten, and yet still dangerous, felt like a message. Someone had buried this years ago, hoping it would never be found. But the earth had other plans. Kathy took a step back, tears welling in her eyes. "It was him," she whispered. "Whoever he is, this belonged to him." Ty clenched his fists. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The silence was broken. The cold years were over. The evidence room at the White Pines Sheriff's Department had long since fallen silent regarding Emily Carson and Layla Brooks. Their case file sat in the back, dusty, labeled #WP0420EL, its thick binder filled with dead ends. But when the hunting knife was delivered, sealed inside an evidence bag and logged into the system on May 6, 2025, the silence ended. It wasn't just a knife. It was a key. For the first time in 5 years, the investigation had something solid, something real. Detective Ramirez, though technically retired, stood inside the station the next morning, holding the evidence bag in his gloved hands. Across the room, Ty Brooks sat silently, arms crossed. The initial CD carved into the hilt matched no known suspects from the original file. But Ramirez had a theory. "Cole Danner," he whispered. A name long buried in an old arrest report, and one that would soon unravel everything. Back in 2017, 3 years before the murders, a man named Cole Danner had been briefly detained after an incident on a hiking trail 90 miles north of White Pines. A woman had reported him for stalking. He followed her for 2 miles, never speaking, just staring. He was let go after claiming it was a misunderstanding. No charges were filed. But the arrest had been logged. Ramirez remembered it because of the way the woman had described him. Tall, thin, wearing a green military-style jacket. Sound familiar? It matched the original witness report from Ridgeview Canyon, the same unknown man spotted near the overlook the day Emily and Layla disappeared. "We missed him," Ramirez said quietly. "We had his name the whole time, but we never put the pieces together." The problem? Cole Danner hadn't been seen since April 2020, the exact week the girls were killed. He'd vanished. The forensic team rushed the testing. Within 72 hours, the results confirmed 2 things. First, the blood on the blade was human. Second, it contained a partial DNA match to Emily Carson. The odds of contamination were low. The knife had been tightly sealed, wrapped in layers that protected it from the elements. It had likely been buried shortly after the murders. Ty's heart dropped when he heard the results. This was it. The first real proof that could tie a weapon to the girls' deaths. The knife was long, designed for skinning game, a hunter's knife. But it was also the kind of weapon used in up-close violence. The team pulled every old database, cross-checked the initials, and searched for Cole Danner. That's when they made the next discovery. The land the knife was found on used to belong to Danner's uncle, a property inherited, then sold quietly months after the murders. Kathy Carson received the call from Ramirez later that day. She had braced herself for it. Years of nothing made you cautious around hope. But when he said the name Cole Danner, she froze. It wasn't familiar. Not someone they knew. Not a neighbor or teacher. And yet, something about it made her skin crawl. She asked to see a photo. Ramirez texted over a grainy DMV image, the last known record of Cole Danner before he disappeared. He had long, stringy hair and a distant, unreadable stare. Kathy stared at the image for a long time. He looks empty, she finally said. Like someone who's already done something terrible. Ty printed out the photo and taped it to his wall, dead center above Layla's memorial. Underneath it, he wrote, "If this is him, we're not finished." That night, he sat awake, replaying every possible connection. Somehow, this man had slipped through the cracks. The local media caught wind of the story within days. New evidence reopens White Pine's cold case, the headlines read. Cameras returned. The town stirred again. For families who had tried to move on, the wound reopened. Some hoped for justice. Others feared the attention would only lead to more disappointment. But the sheriff's department confirmed that the case had officially been reclassified as active. Ty Brooks was now involved directly, not as a victim's family member, but as a student intern with the Colorado Cold Case Division. He had requested placement in White Pines for his spring rotation. It wasn't typical, but Ramirez had pulled strings. "If anyone deserves to be here when this breaks," he told the department head, "it's him." Ty accepted the offer without hesitation. Now, instead of watching from the sidelines, he would be in the room where it happened. Together, Ty and Ramirez combed through Cole Danner's history. He had grown up in a troubled home, 2 arrests before the age of 18, both for assault. He'd been in and out of hiking and survivalist communities, often drifting from one mountain town to another. There were no close relatives except his uncle, who had owned a remote property near White Pines, the same one where the knife had been found. In 2020, just before the murders, Danner had been working under a false name at a camping supply store in Greeley. After April 19th, he vanished. No bank records. No phone activity. No employment. Nothing. Like he walked off the map, Ramirez said, or like someone helped him disappear. That thought chilled them both. They began searching for any rental properties, vehicles, or known associates linked to Danner. Ty noticed a pattern. He often stayed in storage units, not homes. Ramirez raised an eyebrow. "That's it," Ramirez said. "Pull storage records from 2019 to 2021. Within 100 miles. The search took hours, but it paid off. A storage unit, rented under the name Daniel Cross, had been flagged for inactivity. It was 45 miles east of White Pines, tucked in a forgotten part of a rundown industrial park. Rent had been paid in cash, up until 3 years ago, then nothing. No one ever followed up. The unit was locked and had never been opened since. With a search warrant in hand, Ramirez, Ty, and a team of forensics officers arrived the next morning. As the bolt cutters snapped through the rusted lock, a wave of mildew and dust poured from the narrow metal door. Inside, they found a nightmare preserved in steel. There were maps, dozens of them. Most were of hiking trails throughout Colorado. One, marked in red ink, was Ridgeview Canyon. Photos were pinned to the walls, blurry, zoomed-in shots of hikers, most of them women. A few had been taken from high ground, like someone watching from the trees. There was a box of camping gear, a hunting manual, and a plastic container labeled simply, "Journal." Inside were handwritten entries, erratic, disjointed, but unmistakably filled with rage and obsession. One passage read, "They laughed too loud. They didn't belong here. I waited. I knew they'd come alone." Ty read it aloud and had to sit down. He knew those words were about Layla and Emily. He didn't need confirmation. The unit wasn't just a hideout. It was a trophy case. The killer had documented everything, then walked away. But now, his hiding places were being stripped open, one by one. The evidence was overwhelming. Ramirez knew they were close. DNA collected from the journal matched the partial sample found on the knife. Combined with the photos and writings, they had enough to name Cole Danner as the primary suspect in the murder of Emily Carson and Layla Brooks. A statewide alert went out. Interagency cooperation was triggered. Marshals were contacted. Every trace of Cole Danner's possible location was pursued, but still no sign. He had mastered the art of vanishing. Still, this time felt different. They weren't starting from scratch. They had his words, his blood, his plan. He made one mistake, Ramirez said. He left something behind. Ty added, "And now, I'll follow him until the end." The sun hadn't yet risen over White Pines when the cold case team arrived at the sheriff's office. Normally, the building was quiet at that hour, but today, it buzzed with quiet urgency. Boxes of evidence lined the conference table. Photos of Ridgeview Canyon, the knife, the journal, and now grainy trail cam images pulled from old memory cards were spread out like puzzle pieces. A whiteboard held the name Cole Danner in bold marker, underlined 3 times. Above it, in black ink, target, locate and apprehend. For the first time in 5 years, law enforcement had a direction. Not a theory, not a hope, a name, a face, and a growing body of evidence that pointed to a man who had stalked, killed, and disappeared without a trace. Detective Ramirez sat at the head of the table, briefing the team. At his right, sat Ty Brooks, fists clenched, absorbing every word. They reviewed the contents of the storage unit again, the journal, the photos, the marked maps. Forensics confirmed that at least 5 of the photos were of Emily and Layla, taken at a distance, without their knowledge, in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. A chill passed through the room when they realized these weren't random crimes. Danner had followed them, chosen them. One map even had dates scribbled next to Ridgeview: April 4, April 11, April 18th. The final date was the day they vanished. Under it, Danner had written, "They always go to the Overlook." Ramirez closed his eyes for a moment, sickened by the realization that Danner had likely been watching the girls for weeks, waiting for the right moment to strike. He hadn't just happened upon them. He hunted them. Like prey. The level of planning was methodical, disturbingly precise. Meanwhile, the knife, the piece of evidence that reopened the case, was being analyzed further at the state crime lab. DNA had confirmed Emily's blood on the blade, but now they were searching for skin cells or fibers that might point to Danner's involvement more directly. The leather grip was old worn, but inside the grooves, technicians found traces of sweat, human skin cells, just enough to pull a partial profile. The results came back within days, a 98% match to Danner's prior arrest in 2017. For investigators, that sealed it. Now they had physical, biological, and circumstantial evidence all pointing to the same man. The case was no longer cold. It was burning. A statewide warrant was reissued under Danner's real name and aliases. The U.S. Marshal's Office joined the search. "This is no longer just a missing person of interest," one official said. "This is a fugitive homicide case." Ramirez met with Ty privately that evening. They sat in the old fire tower overlooking Ridgeview Canyon, the place where it had all started. Ty stared out at the trees. "I used to think the forest was peaceful," he said quietly. "Now I can't look at it without seeing him out there." Ramirez nodded. "I've worked a lot of cases, Ty. But this one, it stays with you." He paused before continuing. "You know, this investigation, it's taking a toll on you." Ty didn't flinch. "It's supposed to. If it didn't, I'd be worried." Ramirez sighed. "I just don't want you to burn out before we reach the end." Ty turned to him. "The end is when he's in cuffs. Not before." The detective didn't argue. He knew that pain made Ty relentless, and that same pain was a razor's edge he walked every day. Determined, but dangerously close to collapse. As the hunt for Danner widened, agents traced his last known movements. The trail led them to a small town in Montana where a man matching Danner's description had worked under the name Clint Davis at a trail outfitter in 2021. He disappeared after 3 months, leaving behind only a broken tent and a receipt for bulk food rations. Another lead came from Utah, where a similar man had rented a remote cabin using cash. Inside the cabin, once found abandoned, officers located scribbled notes in the same handwriting as the journal, references to Ridgeview. "He circles back," Ramirez said. "He obsesses. He plans. But he doesn't destroy his past. He hoards it." That insight led the team to recheck every location Danner had visited in the years before 2020. They believed he might have another cache, another hiding place. And they were right. In a dilapidated cabin near Pikes Peak, officers discovered a hidden crawlspace beneath rotting floorboards. Inside were tarps, gloves, freeze-dried meals, and another notebook. This one was more paranoid, filled with entries about being watched, about staying clean, and chillingly, "Don't return to Ridgeview unless it's time." Ty read that line over and over. What did time mean? Had Danner planned to come back? Or worse, was he already there? Kathy Carson, after hearing of the new discovery, requested to visit the sheriff's office. She hadn't been there in years. When she arrived, everything fell quiet. She walked into the evidence room, looked at the maps, the notebooks, the photos, and asked just one question: "Why my daughter?" Ramirez didn't have an answer. None of them did. The truth was, Danner had chosen Emily and Layla for reasons known only to him, and maybe that's what made him most terrifying of all. Back at the sheriff's office, tension was rising. Every officer involved in the reopened case was stretched thin. Leads poured in from across the state, hikers who thought they might have seen him, former acquaintances, even survivalist group members claiming they knew a guy who fit the profile. Most tips led nowhere. But one call changed everything. A retired gas station attendant from South Dakota called in, saying he recognized Danner from a photo on the news. He came through in March, the man said. Bought matches, jerky, and asked about nearby forest land. Paid in cash. Had that look, you know? Like he didn't belong anywhere. That call was the break they needed. South Dakota's Black Hills National Forest was massive, remote, wild, and full of places a man like Danner could hide. A team was dispatched immediately. For Ty and Ramirez, it was a moment of both hope and fear. If they were right, they were closing in. But the emotional cost of reopening the case was growing. Ty began suffering from nightmares, reliving the day Layla disappeared, now overlaid with Danner's face from the journal photos. Kathy began having panic attacks whenever the phone rang. Even Ramirez, hardened by decades in homicide, admitted privately to a colleague that he hadn't slept through a night in weeks. The weight of the case wasn't just professional, it was personal. It had haunted the town, broken 2 families, and now threatened to break the very people trying to solve it. "We're getting closer," Ramirez said to Ty one night. "But every inch forward feels heavier." Ty simply nodded. That's how you know it matters. Still, as exhaustion set in, so did the risk of mistakes. Ramirez knew they had to move carefully. Danner was smart, dangerous, and possibly watching them even now. In mid-June, 5 weeks after the knife was discovered, officers searching the Black Hills came across an abandoned camp. A fire pit, warm ashes. A top strung between trees. A trail of footprints that led into a ravine, then vanished. No sign of struggle. Just disappearance. "He knew we were coming," one marshal said. "He left in a hurry, but not in panic." Ty stood at the edge of the ravine, heart pounding. "He's alive," he said quietly. "And he knows we're getting close." What they didn't know, not yet, was how much closer Danner had already come. Because miles away, in another forgotten cabin along the Colorado border, a neighbor had just filed a noise complaint. Said he'd heard someone moving through the woods late at night, carrying something heavy, something that clanked like metal. He hadn't seen a face, but he had a direction, and that direction pointed back toward White Pines. The cabin stood quiet in the dense woods just outside the Colorado border. It was old, half-collapsed from snow damage, the roof patched with rusted sheet metal. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and the nearest paved road, 10. When U.S. Marshals arrived at the location mentioned in the noise complaint, they expected nothing more than animal activity or a trespassing hunter. But as soon as they stepped onto the property, something felt wrong. The footprints around the cabin were human. The fire pit still had warm embers. A tin can of beans sat open on a rotted window ledge. Whoever had been there left just hours earlier. But the most chilling clue was nailed to the inside of the cabin door, a photo. It was Layla and Emily, printed on faded paper, tacked to the wood with a rusted nail. Underneath, scrawled in jagged handwriting, "You never understood me." That single photo reframed everything. It wasn't just evidence that Danner had been there. It was a message, not to the police, but to someone specific. Ramirez stared at it for a long time, hands shaking slightly. "He's angry," he muttered. "This isn't about hiding anymore. It's about power." For the first time, it felt like Danner wanted to be found, or at least chased. The team searched the property thoroughly. Beneath a floorboard, they found a plastic storage box containing receipts, spare keys, and more handwritten entries. One entry stood out. "He said I could use the shack again, but only for a week. He's worried." Ramirez and Ty exchanged glances. "He?" Ty asked. "Who the hell is he?" That sentence introduced a new possibility. Danner hadn't been acting entirely alone. Someone had helped him. Someone local. Someone who knew about the shack near Ridgeview all along. That theory sent shockwaves through the entire investigation. If Danner had an accomplice, it meant someone within or near White Pines had facilitated the murders, or helped cover them up afterward. Ramirez went back through the original list of people interviewed in 2020. Among them was Glenn Harlan, a trail maintenance worker who lived in a cabin just 2 miles from Ridgeview Trailhead. He'd been questioned early on but dismissed due to lack of evidence and a clean record. But Ramirez now recalled something odd. Harlan had volunteered to help with the initial search party. He was one of the first people to walk the western slope, the same area where the girls' belongings were later found. At the time, it had seemed like civic duty. But now, it looked more like staging. Ramirez ordered an immediate re-interview. When they knocked on Harlan's door, he answered with a calm smile. Mid-50s, scruffy beard, flannel shirt. Nothing remarkable. But when asked about Cole Danner, his expression changed. Not fear. Not surprise. Something colder, like calculation. "Haven't heard that name in years," he said. "Didn't think he was still around." Ty noticed the slip. "So you knew him?" he asked. Harlan shrugged. "He camped out here once or twice. Never told me much. Just passed through." Ramirez pressed further. "Did you give him access to the shack near Ridgeview?" Harlan didn't answer. Instead, he stepped back into the house, a red flag. Within minutes, a search warrant was issued. What they found inside would destroy any doubt. A map of Ridgeview with the word drop circled. A radio receiver tuned to emergency channels. And worst of all, a shoe Emily's, tucked in a dusty drawer, tagged with a plastic label, left Ridgeview. Harlan was arrested on the spot. In the initial interview, he denied involvement in the murders, but admitted to helping Danner. "I didn't kill nobody," he said, shaking. "I just gave him a place to stay. Food. Batteries. That's all." When asked why, he muttered, he said he'd done worse things to others. "I was scared." But deeper investigation revealed something else. Cash deposits into Harlan's bank account around April 2020, and again 3 months later. All unaccounted for. Ramirez confronted him with this. "You weren't scared. You were paid." Harlan finally broke. He said they laughed at him, he whispered. Said they didn't respect the land. He snapped. "I didn't know he'd go that far." The confession was damning. Harlan was charged with conspiracy, obstruction, and aiding a fugitive. But the most disturbing part was how easily he'd slipped under the radar, hiding in the same town that had been mourning his victims. News of Harlan's arrest shattered White Pines. Residents were stunned to learn that someone they knew, someone they'd seen at the market on the trails, had played a role in the girls' deaths. Kathy Carson collapsed when she heard the news. "He carried my daughter's shoe," she sobbed. Like it meant nothing. Ty was equally devastated. "We walked right past him. I talked to him during the first vigil. He shook my hand." The betrayal felt too deep to process. Ramirez, too, took it hard. He had personally cleared Harlan 5 years ago. "I missed it," he said. "I looked him in the eye and missed it." The weight of the mistake nearly broke him. But Ty, despite his own grief, reminded him, "We're here now. We're closer than we've ever been. And he's scared. That's why he's running." As more evidence surfaced, a clearer picture formed of how Danner had escaped detection. After the murders, he stayed with Harlan for 2 weeks, then used back roads and off-grid stops to disappear. He never used credit cards. He bartered for supplies. He avoided cameras. He rotated through 3 fake identities, all linked back to addresses from his youth, before his first arrest. He operated like a ghost, but he left behind pieces. The journal, the photos, the receipts. He wasn't perfect, just lucky. And now that luck was running out. Ramirez and Ty compiled a new timeline, now including the help from Harlan. Every detail, every movement was placed on a digital map. They followed Danner from Ridgeview to the storage unit, to the Pikes Peak cabin, to the Black Hills, and now, possibly back toward Colorado. "He's circling," Ramirez said. "He always circles." Then came one final discovery. While cataloging items from Harlan's cabin, a forensics tech found a small flash drive taped beneath a drawer. On it were files, photos mostly. Surveillance images. Camera footage. But one folder was labeled Ridgeview_video. When they opened it, everyone in the room froze. It was footage from a small handheld camera, grainy, shaky. The lens pointed toward a canyon trail. In the distance, 2 girls, Emily and Layla. The timestamp read April 18, 2020, 12:03 p.m. The camera followed them from a distance, zooming in slowly. No audio. Just the sound of the wind and footsteps behind the lens. The footage stopped abruptly, not because of a malfunction, but because the person filming set the camera down and walked forward. Ramirez had to step out of the room. Ty watched the footage twice. Then he said, "That's enough. We know what he did." The air inside the White Pines County Courthouse felt heavier than usual. The town hadn't held a high-profile court proceeding in decades, but on that morning, a courtroom was cleared, security was doubled, and every seat in the gallery was full. It wasn't the trial yet, not even close, but the arraignment of Glenn Harlan brought a swarm of media and reopened old wounds. Harlan was led in through a side door, wrists shackled, chin low, but face blank. He showed no emotion when the charges were read: aiding and abetting a fugitive, evidence tampering, obstruction, and conspiracy to commit murder. When he looked up, he made the mistake of locking eyes with Kathy Carson. She sat in the front row, hands folded in her lap. She didn't blink. She didn't cry. She just stared, burning holes through the man who had helped her daughter's killer vanish. And he looked away first. In the hours after the arraignment, something shifted in Ty Brooks. He wasn't just a victim's brother anymore. He was an investigator, a witness, and soon, maybe even a voice in the courtroom. He returned to Ramirez that afternoon with a request. I want to confront him. Not Danner, Harlan. Before the trial. One-on-one. Ramirez hesitated. Ty, this isn't about revenge. I know, Ty said. But I need to hear him say it. I need to understand why. After pressure from prosecutors and emotional approval from Kathy, Ty was granted a recorded meeting under supervision. It took place in an interview room, with glass on one side and two armed officers just outside. Harlan sat across the table, hands cuffed. Ty walked in slowly, expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ty asked, was it just about money? Or did you believe in him? Harlan's eyes flickered. Both, he muttered. That single word, both, hit harder than Ty expected. Harlan went on to explain how Danner had shown up one spring, raving about purifying the wilderness and removing what didn't belong. He claimed to be protecting the mountains from outsiders. I didn't believe him at first, Harlan said. But he had this logic. Cold, clear. Like he saw the world for what it really was. Ty leaned forward. And what were Layla and Emily? Outsiders. Harlan shrugged. Noise. The word made Ty clench his fists, but he didn't move. He said they laughed too much, took selfies, played music out loud, said the forest should be silent. Ty stared at him for a long time. They were kids. His voice cracked. You let them die. You let him do it. Harlan finally looked away. I didn't stop him, he said, but I didn't kill them either. Ty stood. You may as well have. Meanwhile, the manhunt for Cole Danner reached a boiling point. The lead from the Black Hills cabin had grown cold, but new drone footage taken by park rangers near Ridgeview, now reopened to the public in limited areas, revealed something alarming. A figure was captured walking along a ridge, partially obscured by trees, dressed in dark green. When analyzed frame by frame, the build, gait, and clothing matched Danner's past sightings. He's back, Ramirez said flatly. He's watching us. The footage sent law enforcement into overdrive. Helicopters were deployed. Night vision drones scanned the forest. Old tunnels and ravines once deemed inaccessible were now part of the search. Ty watched the footage over and over. He's circling Ridgeview again, he said, just like he wrote in his notes. Kathy, too, sensed something building. He's not just hiding anymore, she said. He's coming back for a reason. That reason became clearer when a local maintenance worker discovered a strange object tucked behind the memorial sign at Ridgeview's entrance. It was a sealed envelope, weighed down by a rock. Inside was a single piece of paper, no fingerprints, no DNA, just handwriting. Block letters, written in red ink. I see you. I remember. You can't erase me. The message was brief, but its effect was powerful. It was a declaration. Danner wasn't just watching, he was taunting. He knew the investigation was catching up, and instead of running, he was returning to where it began. Ramirez and Ty stood at the trailhead that evening, staring into the trees. He wants us to follow, Ramirez said. Ty nodded. Then let's follow. They weren't just chasing a killer anymore. They were walking into a confrontation 5 years in the making. The plan was simple: flood the Ridgeview region with quiet surveillance. Not visible patrols, not obvious drones, but stealth. Trail cameras, wildlife cams, ranger posts, all eyes pointed inward. They studied Danner's patterns, what he ate, how he moved, how long he stayed in one location before disappearing. They called in experts from wilderness survival training schools. "He'll need to stop for food," one said. "Water, too. No matter how good he is, he can't go without basics." Days passed. Then a break, movement detected near the old mining trail, the same area where the girl's torn flannel had first been found. Thermal imaging confirmed it, a lone figure crouched, carrying a pack. The outline was tall, thin. He was less than a mile from where Emily's body had been recovered. They moved fast. Marshals, local SWAT, Ramirez, and Ty, all staged at 3 access points to surround the area. They didn't want a standoff. They wanted an arrest. Quiet. Clean. But nothing about this case had ever been clean. At 4:37 a.m., they moved in. They found the camp. They found the tarp, the boots, the camera. But Danner was gone, again. In his place was a journal page, nailed to a tree. One line only. "You almost had me, but you never will." Ty broke down when he saw it. Dropped to his knees, hands on his face, sobbing into the dirt. Ramirez stood behind him, silent, helpless. Kathy came later, walking to the site alone. She placed 2 sunflowers at the tree's base. "I'm still here," she whispered. "I'm not afraid of you." But despite the escape, despite the failure to capture him in that moment, the tide had shifted. Danner was on the defensive now. The circle was closing. He was rattled. And the more pressure they applied, the more careless he would become. In the following week, 2 things happened. First, Glenn Harlan agreed to testify. He offered to give up every detail, dates, locations, conversations, in exchange for a lighter sentence. Prosecutors weren't inclined to show much mercy, but the information he gave was critical. He described Danner's tactics for evasion, cache locations, patterns of movement, and his deep obsession with control. "It's not just about the killings," Harlan said. "It's about controlling the memory of them. He wants to be remembered." That insight helped Ramirez frame their next move. "So let's make sure we control the story," he said. "Not him." The second thing that happened, a tip from an amateur photographer hiking near the canyon. He'd captured a high-resolution image of a man watching the trail from a distant bluff. The image was sent to the FBI. The facial recognition result came back with 97% certainty: Cole Danner. They now had what they needed: an active location, a visual, and a man who was getting reckless. It was time. It happened quietly, without gunfire or chase, under a gray sky on a Tuesday morning. Just after 9 a.m., near the base of an old fire lookout tower 30 miles from White Pines, U.S. Marshals cornered and arrested Cole Danner. He had no weapons on him, no backpack, no coat, just a torn flannel shirt, dirty jeans, and a worn pair of boots. His hands were up before they even asked. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm. "Took you long enough," he said. "No resistance. No fight." Just those words, like he'd been expecting this moment, or maybe even inviting it. Officers cuffed him and walked him down the ridge. From a distance, Ty Brooks and Kathy Carson stood watching, hearts pounding, breath held. 4 or 5 years, this man had haunted their lives like a ghost. Now he was flesh and blood, tangible, defeated, and finally in chains. The arrest sent shockwaves through the state. Every major news outlet covered the story. Headlines ran with phrases like "Ghost of Ridgeview captured" and "Fugitive killer in custody after 5-year manhunt." But for the families, there was no celebration, only silence. In Kathy's apartment, the photo of Emily still sat above the fireplace. That night, she lit a single candle beneath it and whispered, "It's over, baby." Ty couldn't speak at all. He sat on his porch, staring into the trees, Layla's hoodie wrapped around his shoulders. When Ramirez called to confirm the arrest was secure, Ty just said, "I want to see him." It wasn't about closure. It wasn't even about anger. It was something deeper, a need to face the man who had taken so much and see what was left. "You might not get answers," Ramirez warned. Ty nodded. "I don't want answers. I want to see the look on his face." The interrogation began the following day. Danner sat alone in a secured room, wrists chained to a metal ring on the table. Ramirez led the questioning. For nearly an hour, Danner said nothing. Then, without prompting, he began to speak. "You ever sit in silence long enough to feel the world breathing?" he asked. Ramirez didn't respond. Danner continued. "I used to think I was the only one who understood how loud the world had become. Cities. Phones. Kids in the woods with speakers." He leaned forward. "They didn't respect the silence. So I taught them." Ramirez stared at him, jaw clenched. "You taught nothing," he replied. "You murdered 2 children." Danner shrugged. "They laughed at me. That's what did it. Not the hiking. Not the music. The laughter." He smiled slightly. "I waited. I planned. I was ready." There was no remorse in his voice. Just a cold, clinical pride. Like a man recounting a project. Ty was allowed to observe behind the two-way mirror. He watched every second, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. At one point, when Danner described hiding under the ridge and watching them eat lunch, Ty nearly burst through the door. It took every ounce of strength to stay where he was. "I could have screamed. Could have warned them," Danner said, voice low. "But I didn't. I wanted them to feel safe. Right before it changed." That line broke something in Ty. He turned away from the glass and walked outside, gasping for air. Ramirez followed moments later. "That's not who he is anymore," he said quietly. "He's not a ghost. He's a coward. Don't let him steal more of you." Ty nodded, eyes filled with tears. "I won't," he whispered. "But I'll be the last thing he sees before he's buried under a guilty verdict." The trial was scheduled for 3 months later. Prosecutors compiled a mountain of evidence: the knife, the journal, the photos, the video, and Harlan's testimony. The charges were vast: 2 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy, unlawful disposal of human remains, stalking, and evading arrest. The judge denied bail immediately. Danner remained in a high-security facility with 24/7 surveillance. He didn't request an attorney, one was assigned to him. When asked if he understood the charges, he simply said, "I know what I did." Kathy Carson was asked if she wanted to testify at the trial. She hesitated at first, but ultimately, she agreed. "He stole her voice," she told Ramirez. "I want him to hear mine." When the trial began, the courtroom was packed. Journalists lined the aisles. Locals who had stopped talking about the murders showed up in support. The jury was selected carefully, screened for bias, trauma, and any connection to White Pines. On the first day, prosecutors laid out the timeline. They showed images of the knife, the shack, the hunting maps, the receipts, the storage unit. Then they brought out the journal. Kathy left the courtroom when the entry was read aloud. They moved like deer. So unaware. I almost felt bad. Almost. Ty testified the next day. He spoke clearly, carefully, his voice cracking only once, when asked to describe Layla. "She was louder than the forest," he said. "She made everything brighter." Then he turned to Danner and said, "And you tried to make everything darker." Danner didn't blink. The most powerful moment came when Kathy took the stand. She wore Emily's favorite scarf and carried a photo in her lap. She didn't cry. Her voice was soft but unwavering. "He didn't just kill my daughter," she said. "He stole her future, her art, her laugh, Her dreams. She looked directly at Danner. But he doesn't get to keep her. I do. In my heart. In every breath I take. You don't own her story. Her testimony moved several jurors to tears. The defense offered no real rebuttal, only a plea that Danner was mentally unwell. But psychologists, after weeks of evaluation, found him competent to stand trial. He's not delusional, one said. He's deliberate. He's dangerous. And he knew exactly what he was doing. The verdict came after just 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Kathy clutched her scarf. Ty dropped his head and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for 5 years. Danner stood motionless as the sentence was read. Life in prison, no possibility of parole. He blinked once. That was all. As he was led away, Ty stepped into the aisle and met his gaze. For the first time, Danner looked unsettled. Just a flicker. Ty didn't speak. He didn't need to. That look said everything. You didn't win. Weeks later, the prison van carrying Danner rolled through the Colorado mountains toward a maximum security facility. He was gone. And White Pines finally began to exhale. Ramirez retired again, this time for good. He moved into a cabin upstate, near water, not woods. I need peace, he said. Kathy used her victims' compensation to start a nonprofit, the Silent Ridge Foundation, dedicated to supporting families of unsolved crimes. And Ty? He graduated with honors. He wore Layla's favorite bracelet at the ceremony. He joined the police academy that fall. 3 months after Cole Danner's sentencing, the Ridgeview Trail reopened to the public for the first time in over 5 years. But it wasn't the same trail anymore. Near the old overlook where Emily Carson and Layla Brooks had taken their final photo, a wooden arch now stood, carved by a local artist and paid for by donations from the community. At the top of the arch, in soft lettering, it read, "The Laughing Trail." Beneath that, in loving memory of Emily and Layla, whose voices still echo here. It was the town's way of reclaiming what had once been lost. Not by forgetting, but by remembering in a way that gave the girls life again. On the day of the memorial's unveiling, dozens gathered with flowers, candles, and photos. Some hiked in silence. Others played music softly from their phones. No longer in fear, but in tribute. Kathy Carson walked the full trail that morning, for the first time since Emily disappeared. She paused at each point where the search teams had once stood. She touched the trees. She closed her eyes at the overlook, remembering the photo Emily had sent that day. The sky had been just as blue. "You're still here," she whispered, "and I'll carry you as long as I breathe." She left a small sketchbook, one of Emily's originals, inside the glass memorial box mounted nearby. Visitors were welcome to read it, flip through the pages, or simply sit beside it and reflect. It became part of the trail, just like the girls had once been, and maybe always would be. Ty Brooks became a full-time officer within a year. His badge was pinned by Ramirez himself at the graduation ceremony. Ty had chosen to stay in White Pines, despite the memories. "This place hurt me," he said during a local interview. "But it also raised me. I'm not here to escape the past. I'm here to protect the future." He began working community outreach programs for youth, talking to high school students about safety, emotional trauma, and resilience. Some days were harder than others. On the 5th anniversary of Layla's death, he didn't speak at the memorial. He just stood beside the trail sign, one hand on the carved wood, eyes closed. People didn't need words from him. His presence was enough. Ramirez visited the trail only once after his final retirement. He brought a single object, a compass, and placed it beneath a rock near the spot where Emily's backpack had once been found. "For the ones still lost," he said quietly. His years in law enforcement had left him scarred, exhausted, but proud. "Some cases take everything," he once told Ty. "But the good ones, they give something back, even if it's just peace. Ramirez now spent his days writing, gardening, and walking his dog. The case was behind him, but not forgotten. There were files he kept in a locked cabinet, not because they were needed anymore, but because they mattered. As for Glenn Harlan, his trial came and went with less media attention. He was sentenced to 25 years for conspiracy and obstruction. In court, he cried. But no one cared. He spoke of fear, of manipulation, of loneliness. But he never once said the girls' names. He doesn't deserve to say them, Kathy said. Not now. Not ever. His name faded from town conversation. People stopped mentioning him. He wasn't part of the story anymore. Just a shadow, forgotten, buried, irrelevant. The Silent Ridge Foundation, founded by Kathy, grew faster than she expected. Letters poured in from all over the country, parents of missing children, families of cold cases, and even retired detectives who had followed the Danner case for years. She set up a support hotline, launched a grant for victims' families, and held a retreat each spring for those still seeking closure. Some cases never end, she told one group. But your story doesn't have to stop. You get to choose what comes next. Her words carried weight. She had lived it. One day, nearly a year after Danner was sentenced, Ty received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed the overlook, same angle, same bench, same mountain view. But no people. Just the scenery. On the back, someone had written, "It's quiet now." Just like it used to be. The handwriting didn't match Danner's. It was printed, simple, careful. Ty brought it to Ramirez, who examined it silently. Might be someone from a survivalist group, he said. Or just someone who was following the case. Ty stared at the photo for a long time. Or maybe someone else was there that day, watching. They never found out who sent it. But the message was clear. Not all stories have clean endings. Not all trails lead to one destination. Some stay open, forever. Still, peace had settled over White Pines in a way it hadn't in years. The annual candlelight vigils turned from mourning to celebration. Music returned to Ridgeview. Families hiked again. Tourists posed for photos beneath the memorial arch. The town didn't forget, but it healed. Slowly, gently, like scar tissue forming over something sacred. Kathy still cried sometimes, late at night. Ty still walked the trail alone on rainy mornings. But neither of them lived in the shadow anymore. They lived in memory. And memory, they learned, could be a place of light.